You know, when we think of World War I, our minds usually jump to muddy trenches, famous poems about poppies, and a whole generation just lost, charging into machine guns. But that's not the whole story, not even close. Today, we're going to peel back those layers of myth and find out how this one conflict, in just 4 incredibly brutal years, completely rewrote the rulebook of combat and literally created the blueprint for modern war. All right, let's get into it.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to start on the ground with the individual soldier, separating the Hollywood myths from the gritty reality. Then, we'll look at the deadly tools that define the battlefield. From there, we'll see how commanders were desperately trying to break the stalemate with brand new tactics and machines. After that, we'll zoom out beyond Europe to a totally different kind of war in the desert, tackle the huge moral questions the war brought up, and then finally, pull it all together to see how WWI's legacy is still with us today.
All right, so let's start where everyone's mind goes first, the Western Front. The image we have from movies, from books, is this non-stop hellish chaos, right? Constant shelling, constant terror. But was that what it was really like every single day for the average soldier?
You know, this quote from a user on a Reddit history forum just absolutely nails it. For most soldiers, the war was not some constant high-adrenaline battle. The whole idea of 24/7 shelling and guys living permanently in muddy holes, that's really a compression of the absolute worst moments. The truth for so many was actually a long, grueling, mind-numbing grind of just waiting.
And this comparison really gets to the heart of it. The reality was way more complicated than the movies let on. For starters, believe it or not, ammunition shortages meant that quiet sectors were often the norm, and soldiers weren't just left to rot in the front line either. A typical British soldier might do about 8 days in the trenches and then get rotated out. And get this, there was a huge difference in the trenches themselves. The Germans dug in first, so they grabbed the high ground. That meant their trenches were often drier and much better built. The Allies had to dig in where they could, often on lower, soggier ground.
Okay, so we've got a sense of the soldier's world. Now let's talk about the hardware, the weapons that created this whole bloody stalemate in the first place. The tech of the time really shaped everything: the tactics, the strategy, and the lives of everyone there.
The basic tool for every single infantryman was a bolt-action rifle. You had the British Lee Enfield, famous for its 10-round magazine. Then you had the German Gewehr 98 and the American Springfield, both super reliable. And these were deadly, deadly weapons, for sure. But the individual rifleman, no matter how good he was about to be completely overshadowed by a new kind of industrial-scale killing power.
600 rounds per minute. That was the rate of fire from a machine gun based on Hiram Maxim's design. It was a weapon that could just mow down waves of attacking soldiers. It's a horrifying image, but it's true. It was like a scythe cutting through wheat. A couple of these things, placed correctly, could stop an attack of thousands of men cold. This weapon, more than any other, is what locked the battlefield into that trench warfare deadlock.
But here's the twist. As terrifying as the machine gun was, it wasn't actually the #1 killer of the war. You'd think it would be, right? Nope. That grim honor, as HistoryNet points out, goes to artillery. The sheer destructive force of massive shells raining down from miles away, that's what caused most of the casualties. It was this horrific, impersonal, industrial-scale destruction.
Okay, so put yourself in a general's shoes in 1915. Your army is pinned down in a trench. You've got machine guns in front of you and artillery shells raining down from above. Everything you learned at military academy is useless. So, what do? How do you break through? This was the single, desperate question that consumed commanders for years.
Well, before the war, the prevailing wisdom, especially for the French, was this idea called the cult of the offensive. They genuinely believed that pure fighting spirit, sheer morale, and just relentless bayonet charges could overcome anything. It's wild to think about. One French officer even said it had become a disease, and the opening battles of 1914 proved just how catastrophically wrong they were. Spirit, it turns out, is no match for a machine gun.
So armies had to get smart, and they had to do it fast. And one of the biggest leaps forward was in how they used artillery. A German colonel named Georg Bruckmüller came up with a whole new method. Instead of just mindlessly blasting the enemy's front line for days, which, kind of gives away the element of surprise, his method was like a short, violent, perfectly timed symphony of destruction. First, a quick strike to knock out communications, then hit their artillery, and finally, blast the enemy infantry right up until the last possible second before your own guys arrive.
And the infantry changed their game, too. The Germans developed what we call infiltration tactics. So instead of advancing in big, clumsy lines, they'd send in small, elite teams of stormtroopers. Their job was to find the weak spots, bypass the heavily defended parts, and just cause chaos in the enemy's rear. The regular troops would then come in behind to clean up. And just like that, you had movement and initiative back on the battlefield.
And the technology, my gosh, the pace of change was just staggering. I mean, look at this. In 1914, you have flimsy little planes made of fabric and wood, basically just for spying. No tanks. Zero. Just 2 years later, tanks are rolling into battle for the first time. By the end of the war, you've got all-metal aircraft, multi-engine bombers, and thousands upon thousands of tanks being churned out. The machine age of war had well and truly arrived.
Now, while this industrial meat grinder was chewing up Europe, a totally different kind of war was being fought thousands of miles away, in the deserts of the Middle East. And it's so important to remember that the Western Front wasn't the only front.
And this is the world of T.E. Lawrence. Yeah, that Lawrence of Arabia. He was a British officer who helped lead the Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire. And his strategy was the polar opposite of what was happening in France. No trenches, no massive charges. This was all about speed, mobility, and hitting the enemy where they least expected it. Instead of fighting the Ottoman army head-on, Lawrence and his forces attacked their supply line, the Hejaz Railway. They blew up trains, they destroyed bridges, and tied down thousands of enemy troops. It was an absolute masterclass in what we now call guerrilla warfare. All this new technology in World War I didn't just create tactical puzzles. It raised these huge, profound moral questions that honestly we're still wrestling with today. And at the top of that list was the use of poison gas. And this is a really fascinating question to think about. I mean, a high explosive shell can tear a human being to shreds. It's about as gruesome as it gets. So why does poison gas feel different? Why does it seem to cross some kind of special moral red line that makes it uniquely evil in our minds?
Well, the answer seems to boil down to one simple, powerful word: control. See, a bullet or an artillery shell, you can aim it. You can at least try to distinguish between a soldier and a civilian. But poison gas, it's uncontrollable. The moment you release that cloud of chlorine, the wind takes it. You can't steer it. You can't call it back. By its very design, it is an indiscriminate weapon.
And this user's comment just gets right to the core of it. The moral outrage against chemical weapons isn't just about the horrific suffering they cause, and believe me, it is horrific. It's that using them violates one of the most basic principles of war, the duty to at least try to spare non-combatants. With gas, that's simply impossible.
Okay, so let's pull all these different threads together now. The trenches, the tech, the tactics, the war in the desert, the moral debates. What does it all add up to? Well, it adds up to nothing less than the complete transformation of war itself.
World War I didn't just give armies new weapons. It forced them into entirely new ways of thinking about conflict. It caused what historians call a paradigm shift, where the whole rulebook basically gets thrown out and rewritten from scratch. And what's so incredible is that the Great War didn't just cause one of these shifts, it caused three.
And these three shifts changed everything. First, war was no longer about which side had the most men. It became a struggle between industrial machines. Second, the idea of combined arms was born. Victory no longer came from just one branch. You needed infantry, artillery, tanks, and aircraft all working together as a single coordinated team. And third, the goal itself changed. It wasn't always about total annihilation anymore. It shifted to neutralization. The idea that you just need to suppress the enemy long enough for your own attack to succeed.
And that is the ultimate takeaway here. You look at every major conflict of the 20th century, the Blitzkrieg of World War II, the Cold War, the Gulf War, they were all fought using the tactical grammar that was written in blood on the battlefields of World War I. The creeping barrage, infiltration tactics, combined arms, guerrilla warfare, even the moral lines we still argue about, it all started right here. So, I'll leave you with this final thought. The war ended over a century ago. We've moved from poison gas to autonomous drones, from trench raids to cyber attacks. But aren't we still wrestling with the exact same questions that haunted the generation of 1914? Questions about technology, about the morality of uncontrollable weapons, and about the fundamental nature of how wars are won. It makes you think, doesn't it? The blueprint written 100 years ago is still very much in use.